Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud, while stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 1061, titled The Human Origin of Morals, written by Joseph McCabe. This one is copyright dated, and it is copyrighted 1926. So, we will do chapters 3 and 4 in this video. And chapter 3 is The Dawn of Conscience, and chapter 4 is Religion and Morals. So, what page is that? Page 20. Okay, so page 20 is where we're starting. Chapter 3. The Dawn of Conscience. The scientific method of studying an idea or an institution is to examine earlier phases of it which are available, just as the scientific method of studying a star is to examine the earlier stages in the formation of a star which we find in the heavens. If you want to know how a man grows up, you do not guess. You study the babe, the boy, the adolescent. In the same way, we understand the grown race, the adult civilization. The earlier stages are, as I have said, seen in the ideas and institutions of savage and barbaric peoples. No educated person now supposes that their lowly character means that they have degenerated from a higher level, that some primitive curse laid on the race blighted its early promise and powers, and these fragments of it have not risen once more. These lower peoples are companies or regiments thrown off the human army at one or other stage as it marched through the ages toward the ideal civilization. I fully explained this in The Origin of Religion, Little Blue Book number 1008. I have it on here. And these booklets are so easily obtained, and the space in each so limited, that I desire to avoid overlapping and to assume that the other volumes of the series have been or will be read. Briefly, we look at the lowest peoples. They are not yet tribes, for the earliest phase of moral ideas. We next take tribes at a slightly higher level of culture, using every test of culture. Then tribes at a still higher level, and so on. I would almost claim a modest merit as a pioneer in this obvious scientific procedure, as I first systematically applied it in my growth of religion, the main conclusions of which are given in The Origins of Religion, Little Blue Book, number 1008. The general practice had been to string together a long list of savage tribes and their peculiar ways, without paying attention to their great differences in culture. I at once reached a conclusion as to the origin of religion, which differed entirely from the accepted view at the moment. But that view was founded only on speculation, helped out by references to tribes without noticing their stage of culture. I here apply the same indisputable method to the origin and growth of moral ideas. On an earlier page, I said that the great work of my friend, Professor Westermarck, a Finn by origin, but one of the most learned sociologists in England, was the classic authority on the subject. It is the first large attempt to trace the origin of morality by studying savage peoples. But I differ, to some extent, from the conclusions of Professor Westermarck, and I am emboldened to oppose my opinion to that of so high an authority because he has followed the customary and erroneous practice which I have just noted. He makes no discrimination between the savage tribes he quotes according to their culture. It is quite easy to do so, and my friend Professor Haddon, one of our first anthrographers. Anthrographers. I wonder what that is. Yeah, somebody look it up, put it in a comment. Anthrographers confirmed me in my attempt. The first sentence of Professor Westermarck's book is, That the moral concepts are ultimately based on emotions, either of indignation or approval, is a fact which certain thinkers have in vain attempted to deny. This is a challenge, not merely to the philosophers and theologians, but to the utilitarians. Morality is founded on emotions, not on perception of utility, he says. Acts are deemed good or bad, for the same reason that the sunshine is said to be hot and ice cold. They excite certain emotions. Our moral ideas are therefore generalizations of tendencies in certain phenomena or human acts to call forth moral emotions. Fundamentally, it is sympathy and resentment that express themselves in these emotions. But a moment's reflection will show that it is only a question of laying stress on a different syllable. Professor Westermark says that it shows confusion on the part of the utilitarians, and that they look for the reasons why acts cause sympathy or resentment. Surely not. We want to know why an act causes resentment, and so is deemed bad. That means that seems to be of very of the very essence of the problem of the origin of morality. And Professor Westermark, when he answers that question, does not differ in the least from me. He repeatedly says that the resentment of the savage who calls an act bad is a reaction toward a cause of inflicted pain. From the first, therefore, the moral sentiment approves acts which give pleasure or service and resents those which inflict pain or injury. And it is a truism to say that the fact of the action rendering service or inflicting pain must be perceived before the emotion can arise. When Professor Westermark says that the recognition of different degrees or quantities of badness by a savage proves his emotional theory, one is surprised. It shows only that the savage perceives some acts to be more injurious than others. I don't know why. My brain goes back and forth on how to pronounce that name. Probably because I'm pronouncing it wrong. All right, I digress. But we may, to some extent, reconcile the theories by admitting that in the mind of the lowest peoples, there is no conscious recognition that certain classes of acts are good or bad. That is, in fact, a material part of my theory. Man is moral before he has morality. He resents an individual bad act before he has moral rules. He does not generalize. He does not make rules. One would naturally expect this low and primitive type of mind in primitive peoples, but I am not merely speculating as to what probably took place in the lowest peoples of today. That is precisely what we find. These are, as I say, the origin of religion, the Yagans of Terra del Fuego, not simply the Fuegans, as is generally quoted, for there are three tribes on the island. The wild Vedas, nearly extinct as a pure race, the Tasmanians, extinct, the Andamanese, the Bushmen, the highest of the group, the Adas of the Philippine Islands, and a few less known fragments of the human family. Pardon me. In estimating the significance of these, I have fortunately the invaluable support of Professor Haddon, who says in his genial way of the whole group, they do not recognize virtue, but they do not perceive vice. They have no moral laws or codes, but their social conduct is generally excellent. They are almost entirely strict monogamists, yet know nothing of chastity. A Knod, Khond, a Knod? No, a Knod, I don't know. Chief from the hills of India was taken to Ceylon and asked to admire how a Veda was faithful to his one wife. Pooh, he said in disgust. Oh, very disgusted. Pooh. He said in disgust, "That is how the monkeys live." Okay. In point of fact, most of the apes are monogamous. And, in spite of a constant statement to the contrary of sociologists, well, except Westermark, it is highly probable that monogamy was man's first institution, except that it was not instituted, but grew up at the animal level as a mere custom. As to the Yogans, I have, in The Origin of Religion, Little Blue Book, number 1008, it says it every time after that, quoted the missionary Bridges, saying that makes my brain think, is he asking missionary Bridges, like the bridge questions? Actually, it's a missionary named Bridges, but I have to tell my brain that because it giggles about it. Anyhow, missionary Bridges says that they know neither God nor evil nor good. A more scientific student, Yades, Yhades, Yades, is quoted by Professor Westermark, and I may translate the passage. No, he may, not me. But here we go. Here's a translation. Of abstract ideas, they have scarcely a trace. It is difficult to define exactly what they call a good or a wicked man, but certainly they have no notion what is good or bad, apart from the individual or object to which they apply one or the other of these attributes. The Tasmanians are said by Professor Westermark to have been without any moral views or impressions, and the Aetas and the other peoples of the group had none. A writer on the Andamanese says of them, certain traits which have been noticeable in their dealings with us would give color to the belief that they are not altogether lacking in the sense of honor and have some faint idea of the meaning of justice. Considering that the Ottoman Islands are on the way of the ships in the Indian Ocean and have long been in contact with higher races, this is feeble enough. But when the same writer attributes to them a belief in a supreme being who will judge them after death, we see clearly that he has not allowed for the influence of missionaries. In short, these peoples at the lowest level have no moral rules or ideas, yet they rarely steal, lie, or murder. They are kindly to the widow and aged. They live peacefully. They observe the Decalogue better than more advanced tribes, but they have no Decalogue. It may be difficult for the reader to imagine such a state of things, but he must remember that we are dealing here with men at the mental level of the old Stone Age. In most cases, they are incapable of abstract ideas, and therefore they cannot draw up rules. They have good customs, as many species of social animals have, but they are incapable of saying to themselves, that is the custom, or that is a good custom. They think only of individual acts. My theory of their condition, which the reader may or may not accept, is that their good habits or social ways of behavior were, as amongst social animals like beavers, apes, baboons, etc., developed by natural selection, just like good teeth. At all events, these men no more reflect on their ways and the utility of them than apes do. They are unconsciously moral, if you like. But moral law is a conscious law. They have no conscience, no consciousness of law. And the next step in man's onward march would obviously be for him to perceive, as his mind developed, that his customs were good, and set them up as standards of conduct. Morals is from the Roman word for customs or ways. Ethics is from the Greek word for the same. It is a clue, and the next higher peoples in the human scale correspond to it. The Australian tribes are at the next level, but there are many different tribes in that vast continent, and many of them have been for a long time influenced by the ideas of white settlers and missionaries. Some travelers will tell you how a tribe believes in a supreme being who punishes and rewards after death. Benjil the All-Father of one tribe, very frequently sent his sons to destroy bad men and bad women. They said, Duramulam, the father of another tribe, was said to be very angry when they do things they ought not to do. Burala, another name for him, had a very drastic hell and a very nice heaven. Turning the page. We'll just pause for hydration, Maddie. Cottonmouth is getting deep. Westermarck and all others rightly see in these statements a confused repetition of the sermons of missionaries. Eyre, who knew the Australians well, said that they had no moral sense of what is just and equitable in the abstract. Spencer and Gillian, the highest living authorities on them, say that they have not the vaguest idea of a personal individual other than an actual living member of the tribe who approves or disapproves of their conduct, so far as anything like what we call morality is concerned. Yet the same authorities say of other tribes of Central Australia that they have a code and their conduct is governed by it. These are comparatively untainted tribes. Now all this is Now all this is not confusing. That had me confused. It is instructive. The Australians generally behave well, and they have a code. During one of my visits to Australia, a policeman was conveying a black murderer across country to be tried. A swollen river washed the policeman off his horse, and the black could have escaped. Instead, he took the policeman's clothing in his teeth. He was swimming with hands tied and saved him. Compare the story in Westermarck of an Australian youth forbidden to eat certain meat during his initiation period and asked if he would eat it if nobody saw him. I could not do that, he said. It would not be right. By right, he said, against the custom. So, right there, customs. This is the root of the matter. The bad act is against custom. Westermarck goes on to show that custom is the lawgiver, the tyrant of primitive people. I do not follow him altogether because his quotations confuse tribes at all levels: Bantu, Eskimo, Bedouins, Indians, and Maoris. But the quotations from lower tribes are consistent. How can I tell? Says a Kafir, asked why he behaves in a certain way. It has always been done. The old Inuits did it, says the Eskimo. The Alchinga, legendary ancestors, order it, say the Australians. It is the dawn of conscience, of an inner voice put into the individual by education, by the social group. Man has perceived the utility of his customs. They are now rules, though the idea is still so vague that many observers deny that they have morality. That is just what we expect. The sun is not up, but the light has dawned. There is no morality in one sense, and there is in another. Is it day or night at dawn? That's a good question. It is neither. It is transition. And evolution means transition. And that is the end of chapter 3. And we'll go on to chapter 4, religion and morals. Okay. For 100 years, ever since men of science began to take an interest in the curious tales of travelers, it has been disputed whether such and such tribes have any moral or religious ideas. The uncertainty was due in part to unskillfulness in the observer. Very often he made no allowance for possible influences of missionaries, who are apt to put their creed in the black man's childish language and he reproduces bits of it in his legends. Often again, the observer of the tribes, especially if he is a missionary, asks the natives if they are conscious of sin and duty, and remorse and God. And since they have not even words for such things, he bluntly says that they have no religion and no morals. The whole literature upon which we draw for our knowledge of the religious and moral ideas of lower races is full of these contradictions. We say it of the Vedas, Adamanese, Australians, and others. A very long list could be added. Lord Avebury, Avebury, Origin of Civilization, one of the first works on these lines, concluded generally that savages have no moral feeling, and his savages were as usual a melody of tribes at all levels of culture. One writer says, the Reshin have no moral sense whatsoever, whereas it is well known that the Indians' code was high. The Hottentots, in particular, and yeah, I had to look it up, that's real, and blacks in general are said to have no moral sense, but a high authority tells us that the strictness and servility of Hottentot justice are things in which they outshine all Christians. And another says that one of the most marked characteristics of black people is their keen perception of justice. One authority says that the Tonga Islanders, a high race, have no words essentially expressive of vice, injustice, and cruelty. And another says that they firmly believe that the gods approve of virtue and are displeased with vice. I could extend the list indefinitely. But the man who studies morality in the light of evolution is not troubled by these verbal contradictions. They are just what he expects to find. Ask three travelers to a certain region whether the natives have government, shops, churches, or art. One will say no, one yes, and the third a sort of government, etc. We more advanced peoples attach meanings to our words which do not apply to the corresponding culture of the natives. It is entirely in harmony with evolution. In Australia, the highest authorities on the natives have assured me that they have no religion and no morals. And they have then assured me that the natives have an elaborate belief in spirits, especially the spirits of certain remote and very powerful ancestors, and a relatively high code of character. It is religion and morals in the making. It is from first to last a massive testimony to evolution. Everything in the world testifies to it. Everything in the world is illuminated by it. Hence, we cannot expect to put our finger on a point in the history of the race and say, here, where here is where religion begins, there is where morality begins. They rise gradually, with a long dawn. Peoples who do not even believe in spirits, and there are some, clearly have no religion. But at what precise point the belief in the shadow becomes a religion, no sensible man will try to say. It is the same with morality. The lowest peoples have nothing corresponding to conscience or to conscious code of conduct, but they more or less automatically follow a code. At a higher level of intelligence, they are conscious of a code, but it is merely custom. In a still higher level, the spirits of the dead are said to be just as interested as the living community in the observance of this code. Religion and morality enter in combination. That they arose independently from quite different roots, we have now abundantly shown. No modern authority questions it, and they remained independent for some time. Of the Bambala of the Congo, an authority says, there is no belief in the gods or spirits punish wrongdoing. Sir E. F. M. Thurn, yeah, IMTHURN, M. Thurn, The greatest authority on the Indians of Guyana says that they have an admirable code of conduct, pardon me, and an elaborate animistic religion, but there is absolutely no connection between the two. An authority says of the Comanche Indians, no individual action is considered a crime, but every man acts for himself according to his own judgment, unless some superior power should exercise authority over him. Another says of the American Indian generally, in his conception of a God, the idea of moral good has no part. Such quotations will be found by the score in Westermarck's book, from which, unless a reference is given, I borrow them. But if we are equipped with the evolutionary theory, we shall look carefully for the germ of the higher growth, even at the lower level, and we shall always find it. Morality and religion gradually, and a large part naturally, blend. It is seen even in Australia. The boy is taught a code, as we saw, and he holds strong to it. The elders have told him of powerful spirits, or what corresponds to our spirits, who are interested in that code, just as they frighten the woman away from their secret ceremonies by talk of these spirits. But when the boy is initiated to the tribe, he is laughingly told that it was all fiction, like the bogey, or the policeman round the corner, with which silly nurses frighten naughty children. Nevertheless, these Australians do believe intensely in spirits, and they have a profound reverence for certain great mythical ancestors. Take again the natives of the Slave and Gold Coast in Africa, from which so many of the American Negroes were brought. We have an exceptionally fine series of monographs on their natives by Major Ellis, and they give us an admirable illustration of the separate evolution of religion and morals. Major Ellis says, religion at the stage of growth at which we find it among these three groups of tribes has no connection with morals and the relations of men to one another. Murder and theft are offenses against a man. The gods are not interested. At the same time, these natives firmly believe that all evil comes from the invisible spirits, and so they are well on the way to a belief in avenging gods. In other cases, we get the usual contradictions for the usual reasons. Amongst the hill tribes of India, we are told, there is no connection of religion and morals. One authority says even that the idea of a god demanding righteous conduct of men is beyond the capacity of the fully civilized Hindu of the plains. His gods, like those of Greece and Rome, like amorous adventures themselves. It is clear that this writer is thinking only of one line of the moral code, chastity. Another authority says that the hill tribes, which are pre-Aryan, have no ideas of moral qualities originally, but they have words for them derived from the Hindus. All this apparent tangle of testimonies is, as I said, what we should expect. Writers who take strict account of borrowed ideas from missionaries or travelers, and who do not look for advanced ideas like sin and virtue and God, tell a consistent story. The particular circumstances of tribes and all their utterly different environments give their ideas different shades and shapes, but the general evolution is the same. Custom is at first followed automatically. Custom then enters the consciousness of the tribe and becomes its tyrant. But custom is the English word for mos, M-O-S, the Latin root of morals, and ethos, the Greek root of ethics. Morality is evolving. And as it evolves, it approaches religion quite naturally. Custom is, after all, something set up by ancestors. As the savage rises in intelligence, he sees this, but he believes that these ancestors still live, and in very many, if not most, parts of the earth, he believes that they are exacting, malicious, and vindictive. All this evil All his evils and misfortunes come from them. It is an obvious development that he will come to think that the spirits punish him for violating custom. God will punish his sins. Westermarck quotes this stage amongst the Maoris, Tahitians, Fijians, American Indians, Eskimos, and Hindus. All these are much higher peoples than the Australians and Africans. It is a later stage. Further, all these peoples have priests or rudimentary priests. These begin to interpret the will of the gods or spirits to ordinary mortals, and for various reasons, some of which I have given earlier, they soon represent the gods as interested in a man's conduct. For instance, rain or health very frequently does not follow their sacrifices. They have to invent reasons. A good reason is that the man has offended the spirits by his conduct or has been immoral. I would not call this the dawn of the sense of sin. It is the beginning of its manufacture. All this again comes gradually amongst the natives of the society. That's confused of the Society Islands. I've never heard it called that, Society Islands. Amongst the natives of the Society Islands, for instance, and many others, the only crimes that were visited by the displeasure of their deities was the neglect of some rite or ceremony. That was the main thing from the priest's point of view. In fact, old custom is, or was, almost the one thing in the world that could beat even priests and kings. Scores of quotations could be given to show this, but the way in which even Christianity had to yield over and over again to local custom is well known. So priests had to go cautiously in encroaching upon the field of customs, which included morals. The second element of the evolution of religion, the deification of the more striking parts of nature, which gave religion its great gods, was much slower in blending with morality. These big spirits did wonderful things and were admired at a distance, but there was always a tendency in some of them to become moral deities, because they could do so much harm or withhold so much good. The moon, a very popular early god or goddess, did no particular good or harm, but the sun was a terrible tyrant in the tropics. The sky might cause a drought by refusing rain, or might send thunder and lightning. The water god might cause floods. The fire god burned houses. The wind god sent destructive hurricanes, and so on. Chiefly, however, it was the deified ancestors, not the nature gods, who were concerned with the observance of custom. They had made the customs. They took an interest in them. And although Herbert Spencer and Grant Allen were wrong in thinking that ancestor worship was almost the only source of the making of gods, very many were made that way. Even great gods of the historic religion, like the Osiris of the Egyptians, are believed to have been ancestors. The Romans deified their emperors. The Christians deified Christ, and later Buddhists made a god of Buddha. Now, in the blending of tribes into kingdoms, when it was necessary for the rival priesthoods to adjust their deities, ancestor gods were often fused with old nature gods. Osiris was blended with an old sun god. These wise, deified old ancestors were particularly interested in proper conduct, and Osiris became in time the judge of the dead. The wicked were seen to flourish in this life. Very well, said the priest, they will get it in the next, which happens to be a good deal longer. So we find nature gods turning ethical. Even Jupiter and Zeus were guardians of justice. They were the sky gods, the dispensers of rain and sunshine, the fathers of all men. Yet Zeus, Jupiter, Dian, Thor, the old sky god of the Aryans, was believed to have had not the slightest regard for sex rules. And there we come to a new and interesting chapter in the evolution of morals. Many of the nature gods had, as I said, a natural tendency to become ethical. They sent rain or sunshine or fertility. They caused drought and fires, storms, and floods. One had to gratify them by observing the rules, and one of the most important of all, when men learned agriculture, was the goddess, in a few places God, or fertility. The spirit of Mother Earth was even more important than that of Father Sky. But quite naturally, the fertility of the earth became closely connected with a woman's fertility. At first, human beings capitulated like cattle, not even knowing. The Australians did not know it, that the man begot the child. In time, love and fertility became one of the mightiest facts of life in the mind of men. The most tremendous force, ben- the most beneficent, the most beneficent thing in the world was the spirit of sex pleasure. This gave a twist to the primitive moral rules, and as the spirit of war just as naturally became deified at the same time, another grave perversion of the humanitarian code of conduct, as we understand it, occurred in moral evolution. These and other eccentricities we will now show to be a normal part of the evolution of conscience. That's the end of chapter 4. Yep, that's the end of chapter 4. And that brings us to the end of part 2 of Little Blue Book number 1061, titled The Human Origin of Morals, written by Joseph McCabe, copyright 1926. Thanks for listening, and join me for part 3.